Welcome back to USA Daily Report. I'm Rachel Maddow. Ladies and gentlemen, amid the turbulence of global geopolitics, a letter from U.S. President Donald Trump to Prime Minister now Jonas G. has surfaced like a delayed action bomb, igniting a storm of controversy over America's national security and strategic interests. The letter was first revealed by PBS on the 19th and later reposted by reputable outlets such as CBS News, Times, and USA Today. In the letter, Trump accuses Denmark of failing to protect Greenland from Russia and China and demands that NATO support full U.S. control of the island. Those words are the opening signal of a new contest for dominance, where Greenland appears as a critical piece on the global chessboard, an icy island whose strategic value far exceeds its outward calm. This letter has not only shaken Europe, but also triggered a chain of reactions from multiple stakeholders, forcing the entire world to look toward the Arctic, where the silence of ice and snow conceals a dramatic, unseen struggle. The letter emerged in the context of President Trump nearing the completion of the first year of his second term. And in this term, he carries the ambition to build a massive missile defense system called the Golden Dome, the Golden Dome. The content of the letter is quite striking. We will quote it verbatim. Dear Mr. Jonas, considering that your country decided not to grant me the Nobel Peace Prize for stopping 8 wars and more, I no longer feel obligated to think about peace anymore. Although it will always prevail. Instead, now I can think about something better and more suitable for the United States. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China. And why do they even have the right to own it? There is no document proving anything, only a single ship that docked there hundreds of years ago. But we Americans also had ships dock there. I have done more for NATO than anyone else since its founding. And now NATO should do something for the United States. The world will not be safe unless the United States fully controls Greenland. Thank you. President Donald Trump. In the letter, Trump complains bitterly, I ended more than 8 wars, and yet you still did not give me the Nobel Peace Prize. So I have no reason to put peace above everything anymore. From now on, I will think about America's interests. And because America needs Greenland, we will control this island. One could say these words are like a sharp blade cutting through the old layer of peace wrapping between the U.S. and Europe. Trump turned the Nobel Prize into a justification to break free of constraints with allies in the face of the threats from Russia and China. Denmark, meanwhile, cannot protect the island. Their force is merely 2 dog sled vehicles, one old and one purchased only recently. With such a rudimentary military posture, how could Denmark withstand the formidable forces of Moscow and Beijing? Meanwhile, Greenland is a gigantic island over 2 million square kilometers larger than Mexico, and even roughly equivalent to 25% of the land area of the continental United States. And what is Greenland's population? Only about 56,000 people, most of them Inuit living in the south. For an island that large, Denmark has failed to defend it and still must spend an enormous budget to maintain it. Each year, the mainland must subsidize more than $1 billion for the people on the island. Therefore, for Denmark, Greenland is clearly an economic burden, not some richly profitable asset. Returning to the letter, Trump linked Greenland to NATO. He argues that the United States has paid too much for Europe for too many years. The U.S. military protects Europe without demanding anything. Now it is time for Europe to repay that goodwill by supporting America's control of green. Otherwise, there will be a 10% tariff starting on the 1st, rising to 25% beginning in June until the Greenland issue is fully resolved. This tariff strike had immediate impact, forcing some European countries to step back. Evidence? At first, 8 European nations, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, and Finland issued a joint statement supporting Denmark. Each country, among those 8, sent troops to the island. How many brigades were deployed? Not a single brigade. It was called the 8-Nation Joint Force, but in reality, it was only 37 soldiers. France contributed the most 15 mountain infantry troops, and Germany dispatched a 13-person expedition team. Other countries, like Finland and Sweden, sent only small symbolic numbers of personnel. And immediately after Trump announced the tariffs, Germany hurriedly withdrew its troops. History also proves that buying an island is not a crazy idea. On the contrary, it is entirely feasible. In 1916, Denmark and the United States signed a treaty called the Danish West Indies Treaty. Under this treaty, Denmark sold its colony in the Caribbean to the U.S., the Danish West Indies, for $25 million in gold. That amount is equivalent to roughly $600 to $700 million today if adjusted for inflation, and about $5.7 billion if converted by the value of gold. After the purchase, the United States renamed the territory the U.S. Virgin Islands. Those islands had been a Danish colony since the 17th century. Why did Denmark agree to sell them to the U.S.? Because at that time, the Caribbean islands were used for sugar cultivation and the slave trade. But by the 19th and early 20th centuries, the island economy was no longer profitable. It suffered heavy losses, forcing the mother country to provide continuous subsidies. As a result, they became an economic burden for Denmark. This is very similar to Greenland's situation today. When World War I broke out, the U.S. feared that Germany would occupy the Caribbean islands and use them as a naval base to attack U.S. territory. Because the area is very close to the Panama Canal, it could directly threaten America's lifeline. Therefore, the United States moved quickly to purchase that colony. Another example, in 1803, the U.S. carried out the Louisiana Purchase from France for $15 million. This deal is one of the largest territorial purchases in world history. Louisiana at that time covered 2.14 million square kilometers, nearly 23% of today's U.S. area, encompassing the entire Mississippi River basin, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico up to the Canadian border. Why did France sell such a vast territory to the U.S.? Because at that time, Napoleon needed money to fund wars in Europe. France was also struggling to control its colonies after the slave uprising in Haiti. France realized that holding a distant territory like Louisiana was an unnecessary burden. They feared that if they continued to hold it, Britain would use its powerful navy to seize Louisiana, turning it into a base that could threaten other French colonies. Therefore, Napoleon decided to sell quickly to avoid losing everything for nothing. For the U.S., this was a golden opportunity. By purchasing Louisiana, America not only doubled its territory, but also took control of the entire Mississippi basin. This helped prevent France or Britain from holding the region and threatening from the west, while opening the door for migration waves and economic development. At first, many Americans called Louisiana a wasteland or useless land, but later it became a treasure with fertile agriculture and abundant resources. More than 60 years later, in 1867, the U.S. bought Alaska from the Russian Empire for $7.2 million. This is considered the cheapest territorial purchase in U.S. history. Why did Russia sell Alaska? At that time, Russia had just lost the war coup and was facing serious financial difficulties. Alaska was also a remote landmass, like a gigantic, useless block of ice across the strait. So for the Russians, it was a profitable deal. They gained money and eliminated an economic burden, high maintenance costs, low extraction benefits, a position too far away, and a high risk of being taken for free by the British. Americans at the time also erupted in protests. Because Secretary of State Seward negotiated the Alaska purchase, people mocked it as Seward's foolishness. Many believed Alaska was nothing but a useless pile of ice. However, later, it became one of the best bargains in history. In 1896, gold was discovered in Klondike. In 1968, the Prudhoe Bay oil field was discovered, the largest oil field in North America, and most importantly, Alaska became a crucial military base with missile warning radar capable of monitoring the entire North Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, we can see that the situations of the Virgin Islands, Louisiana, and Alaska are all very similar to Greenland's situation today. Beyond military value, Greenland is a massive treasure trove of resources that the United States cannot ignore. The island has helium-3, a rare isotope used for nuclear fusion, seen as an endless clean energy source of the future. On Earth, helium is almost non-existent, but within Greenland's rock layers, there is a significant quantity. If nuclear fusion technology is commercialized, helium-3 will become the new black gold powering artificial intelligence, massive data centers, and the U.S. economy in the 21st century. In addition, the island possesses enormous reserves of rare earth elements, essential raw materials for semiconductor chips, electric vehicle batteries, guided missiles, and high-tech weapons. At present, China controls nearly 70% of global rare earth production, and if it continues to expand its influence in Greenland, the United States will become completely vulnerable in the technology supply chain. Oil and gas beneath Greenland's ice are also extremely abundant enough to sustain U.S. energy independence for many decades. Unfortunately, all those resources are currently in the hands of a Denmark that lacks the capacity to develop them, and China is gaining access through bilateral cooperation projects. Since 2008, Beijing has signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with Denmark, paving the way for cooperation in green energy, maritime transport, scientific research, and a number of Arctic-related projects. On the surface, it is science, but in reality, it is an opportunity for China to conduct reconnaissance on the forward line, pushing right up to America's doorstep. They set up monitoring stations, purchase mining rights, and build infrastructure under civilian cover. This is no different than America's Achilles heel falling into the enemy's hands. As the Arctic melts, commercial ships from Shanghai could travel straight up through the far north to Europe or to America's east coast, cutting the distance in half compared with the Malacca route. On the surface, they are cargo ships. Under the water, they could be nuclear submarines. Chinese submarines could hide beneath thick ice and launch missiles directly at the U.S. from a shorter distance. If China controls part of Green, it would have a base to deploy radar, track missiles, or use submarines like daggers aimed at the heart of the American mainland. The outside world can hardly know how much China has already controlled, but for Trump, Greenland has become a key battlefield in the U.S.-China confrontation. America cannot allow such a critical base to fall into China's hands. From another angle, historical events have provided a legal basis for buying back Grill. Since Lincoln in the 19th century, the United States has discussed this. In 1946, under Truman, the U.S. raised the issue of buying Grillian again. In 1956, under Eisenhower, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Radford, once again called on the government to buy Greenland. Radford wrote a letter to Defense Secretary Wilson. The letter emphasized that the island is a high-value strategic position for missile defense, both defensive and capable of hosting missiles for proactive strikes. During the Cold War, the U.S. built the Tour Air Base, whose initial mission was to operate radar systems for early warning of, as the text states. We can see just how important Greenland is. Thus, buying the island is not a sudden idea of Trump's. Every previous U.S. president also wanted it. But perhaps only today can that dream become reality. So what would happen if the United States fully controlled Greenland? At that point, America's defensive system would form a tripod balance. This tripod would be a solid triangle with 3 vertices. The first vertex is Alaska in the northwest. The second vertex is Greenland in the northeast. And the third vertex is U.S. territory in Vietnam. Looking toward the Arctic, America lies in Vietnam like a giant. If Alaska is the left leg, then Grill is the right leg. Without one leg, the U.S. would face the vast gap of the North Atlantic, where ballistic missiles or enemy submarines could slip through unobstructed. With Greenland, the U.S. would stand firm like a fighter on 2 legs. Alaska has radar and missile bases. Grill has the early warning UAWR system, and the U.S. mainland is the command center and the main counterstrike force. These 3 points form a perfect protective circle, ensuring that any missile coming from the Arctic must pass through one of the 3 key points and be detected from thousands of kilometers away. Alaska has belonged to the U.S. since 1867, so the current tripod is missing only Greenland. We know any complete defense system must deploy missile bases at strategic locations. Grill lies in the northeast of the United States. Although it is not the only position, it is an indispensable link in the Golden Dome that Trump is building. The Golden Dome functions like a circular shield covering the entire North American continent, capable of intercepting any missile that attempts to pierce through, thereby ensuring not only America's security, but also extending beyond U.S. territory. One could say it is the modern equivalent of the legendary Golden Bell cover and Iron Shirt armor in the contemporary world. It is not merely a simple missile shield, but a network of radars, satellites, sensors, and interceptors spread across North America, supreme in defense, reaching a realm where blades and swords cannot penetrate. At this point, you may wonder, why has the Arctic become the most dangerous avenue of attack? Because Earth is a sphere, the shortest path between 2 points is not a straight line on a plane, but a great circle curve. In the past, if Chinese warships wanted to reach the U.S., they had to travel from the South China Sea through the Malacca Strait into the Indian Ocean, then circle into the Pacific. That journey is extremely long. But if they go north via the Arctic Sea route, they can follow a path along Sakhalin straight to the far north and then descend either directly into Alaska or through Greenland to reach the U.S. This route cuts the journey in half. That is why China is frantically building icebreakers, turning the Arctic route into a viable shipping lane. This route will cut global trade distances by half. It will pass through Russia, then through Northern Europe, and then to Greenland. Just crossing Greenland brings you to America's east coast. In the future, whoever can hold this route can choke the economic throat of the entire world. And on this route, Greenland is a decisive strongpoint. Now, if we replace warships with missiles and replace shipping lanes with missile trajectories, then the path over the Arctic becomes the most accurate and fastest route for China to strike the United States. From bases in northern China or from Russia's Barents Sea, missiles aiming for the U.S. would most quickly fly over the Arctic. Then, any missile from Beijing to Washington, whether an ICBM or a hypersonic missile, would take only half the time compared to flying across the Pacific. Grill lies directly on that flight path, like a gigantic wall blocking every enemy. If the U.S. controls this island, it can deploy additional advanced radars, infrared sensors, and interceptor launch platforms directly on green territory. The UWR radar in the Northwest can detect missiles at distances of over 4,000 kilometers, providing the U.S. military with a valuable 5 to 10 minutes of warning. That is enough time to activate interception systems such as Patriot, TS, AAD, or SM, 3 missiles on destroyers. At that point, the tripod becomes impregnable. Alaska blocks the Northwest, Green blocks the Northeast, and the U.S. mainland serves as the command and counterstrike center. No matter how strong the adversary is, they cannot penetrate that shield without being detected and destroyed. But what if there is no green? Without this island, warnings would come much later, and major cities on the East Coast would become easy targets for destruction. Without green, the tripod would collapse like a martial artist, without a center of gathered energy where all skill becomes emptiness. Then, a massive hole would appear in the northeast direction. The consequence? America's East Coast, where major cities, financial centers, and political hubs are concentrated, would become highly vulnerable. A hypersonic missile, also called a silver missile, launched from China at Mach 5 to Mach 10, would need only 20 minutes to hit Washington or New York. Reaction time would be too short. Even the strongest defense system would struggle to stop it. That is precisely why Trump insists the world will not be safe unless the United States fully controls Greenland. He does not only want a military base, he wants to turn Greenland into a sealed vital point, so the Golden Dome reaches a state of permanent invulnerability. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, with the island ride-in, the U.S. tripod becomes complete. It can advance to attack and retreat to defend. It can strike adversaries with ease without fear of retaliation. Raising a hand is enough to make the world tremble. The tripod we are discussing is evaluated at the 3 points: Alaska, Gillen, and the United States. But if the goal is to expand the Golden Dome covering the entire North American continent and placing the U.S. at the center of that dome, then how would it be done? In that case, the tripod would extend southward And Cuba, together with Latin American countries, could become a new vertex. Perhaps that is also why recently President Trump has repeatedly emphasized that Latin America is America's backyard. Of course, at this moment, the immediate issue is still Greenland, the most important piece to complete the Golden Dome. This island is the life or death pressure point in every geopolitical game. The Arctic ice and snow are hotter than ever, and President Trump's dome will shape the world order in the not-so-distant future. And here, today's program must pause. Please share your personal views in the comments below.